The battlefield was silent, but Ethan Carter knew that silence on a battlefield was never a good sign. Smoke curled from burning wreckage, and the metallic scent of blood and scorched earth filled the air. The war between humanity and the Zereth Empire had been raging for years, and this latest battle had been another brutal clash. Ethan, a combat medic for the Terran Defense Force, moved carefully through the ruins of what was once a military outpost. His job was simple: find any survivors and help them, no matter which side they were on. As he stepped over fallen debris, his eyes caught movement near a collapsed wall. He hurried forward and stopped short when he saw her. Lying against the rubble was a Zereth warrior, but not just any warrior. Ethan recognized her immediately. Her deep violet skin, silver tattoos that glowed faintly on her arms, and regal armor marked her as royalty. This was Princess Silara, the only daughter of King Vorton, ruler of the Zereth Empire. She was badly injured. A deep wound on her side was still bleeding, and her breathing was shallow. Ethan hesitated. Saving her would be risky. If his own people found out, he could be accused of treason. The Zereth were humanity's enemies, and their warriors were known for their brutal combat skills. Many believed they were beyond reason, raised to see humans as weak and unworthy. But Ethan wasn't a soldier, he was a healer. And right now, she wasn't an enemy. She was a wounded being who needed help. With a sigh, he knelt beside her and pulled out his medical scanner. The device beeped softly as it analyzed her injuries. 2 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a severe laceration on her side. She wouldn't last much longer without treatment. Ethan set his rifle aside and pulled out a syringe filled with a nanite-based healing agent. He pressed it against her neck and injected the solution. Almost immediately, her breathing steadied, and the bleeding slowed. That was when her eyes snapped open. Her irises glowed like molten gold, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw pure rage in them. Before he could react, her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Even injured, her strength was incredible. "What are you doing?" she growled, her voice hoarse but filled with defiance. "Keeping you alive," Ethan replied calmly, not pulling away. Silara's grip tightened. She stared at him, confusion and suspicion flickering across her face. To her, humans were the enemy. She had been raised to believe they were weak, selfish creatures. And yet here was one, tending to her wounds instead of finishing her off. "Why?" she demanded. Ethan shrugged. "It's my job." She studied him for another long moment, then slowly released his wrist. Exhaustion crept back into her expression, but she didn't take her eyes off him. Ethan continued working quickly. He pressed a sterilized patch against her wound, sealing it with medical foam. The nanites would do most of the healing, but she still needed rest. He pulled a small canteen from his belt and offered it to her. Silara hesitated before taking it. She sipped cautiously, as if expecting poison, but when nothing happened, she drank more. "You're a fool," she muttered. "If my people find you with me, they will kill you." "Probably," Ethan admitted. "But if I left you here, you'd die anyway. So let's call this an even risk." She exhaled sharply, something close to amusement flickering in her eyes. But before either of them could say more, a distant rumbling made them both freeze. Ethan turned his head, his instincts going on high alert. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Silara's expression darkened. "They're looking for me." Ethan glanced down at her. She was in no condition to fight or run. If the Zereth warriors found them, they would assume he was holding their princess hostage. If human forces arrived first, they would assume he was a traitor. Neither option was good. "Can you walk?" he asked. Silara gritted her teeth and forced herself to sit up. She winced but managed to swing her legs under her. "I can move," she said, though it was clear she was in pain. Ethan didn't waste time. He grabbed his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and moved to support her. "We need to go. Now." Together, they disappeared into the ruins, leaving behind the battlefield where fate had brought them together. Little did they know, their journey was only beginning. Ethan kept his steps light as he moved through the ruins, guiding Princess Silura beside him. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance, growing closer. Zereth warriors were searching for their princess. If they found her with him, things could go very badly. Silura was trying to walk on her own, but Ethan could feel her body trembling from exhaustion. The healing nanites had helped, but her wounds were still fresh. "We need to move faster," Ethan whispered. Silura shot him a glare. "I am not weak. I can keep up." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. He knew her pride wouldn't let her admit the truth. Instead, he focused on getting them away before the search party arrived. They ducked behind a collapsed building, where Ethan scanned the surroundings. The ruins stretched out in all directions, filled with broken structures and smoldering debris. In the distance, he could see the remains of a crashed Zereth transport ship. It wasn't much, but it could provide them with cover. "We need to reach that ship," he said, pointing. Silura followed his gaze. "You think it still works?" "Not as a ship, but as a hiding place. Maybe." She nodded, and they started moving. Every step was a struggle for Silura, but she pushed forward, her jaw clenched. Ethan respected her determination. Most people in her condition would have collapsed by now. The voices of the Zereth warriors grew louder behind them. "They are close," Silura murmured. Ethan knew she was right. The warriors were spreading out, searching every corner of the battlefield. Soon, they would reach this area. "We need to hurry," he said. But before they could take another step, a bright blue scanning light swept over the ruins. Ethan grabbed Silura and pulled her down behind a broken wall just in time. The light passed inches above their heads. Silura tensed. "They are using search drones." Ethan cursed under his breath. The Zereth Empire's technology was advanced, and their drones were some of the best in the galaxy. If one of them locked onto their heat signatures, they'd be surrounded in seconds. "We need to go low-tech," Ethan muttered. He pulled a small device from his belt and activated it. A faint pulse of energy rippled outward, temporarily scrambling the drone's sensors. It wouldn't last long, but it would give them a few minutes. Silura raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. You are more than just a simple human medic." "I like to be prepared," Ethan said, offering a small grin. They used the opportunity to slip through the rubble, moving closer to the crashed transport ship. The wreckage was larger than Ethan had expected, its metal frame twisted and scorched from battle. As they stepped inside, Silura leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Ethan could see the strain on her face. "You need rest," he said. "I will rest when I am safe," she replied stubbornly. Ethan sighed. He pulled out his scanner and checked her vitals. The nanites were working, but her body was still weak. She needed proper medical treatment, but there was no way to get it right now. A sudden metallic clank echoed through the ship. Ethan spun around, gun raised. Silura's eyes flashed as she reached for her blade. A shadow moved in the darkness ahead. Ethan's heart pounded. If it was a Zereth warrior, they were in trouble. He kept his finger on the trigger, ready to fire. Then, a small mechanical creature crawled into the dim light. Ethan exhaled in relief. "Just a maintenance drone," he muttered. The tiny machine, barely the size of a backpack, beeped and whirred as it moved through the wreckage, scanning the broken ship. It didn't seem to notice them. Silura frowned. "Can you reprogram it?" Ethan smirked. "You really don't trust me, do you?" She crossed her arms but didn't respond. Ethan knelt beside the drone and accessed its panel. It was damaged but still functional. With a few quick adjustments, he redirected its signal, making it send false heat signatures further away. "That should keep them busy," he said. Silura stared at him with an unreadable expression. "You are full of surprises, human." "Ethan. My name is Ethan Carter," he said. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a slight nod, she said, "Silura." Ethan gave a small smile. He already knew who she was, but hearing her say it felt different, more real. Suddenly, the ground shook with the sound of approaching footsteps. The warriors were near. Silara's expression turned serious. They are coming. We must be ready. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle. Their escape had just begun. The metal walls of the crashed transport ship vibrated as the heavy footsteps of Zereth warriors approached. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, his heartbeat steady but alert. Silara pressed her back against the wreckage, her sharp eyes scanning the dim interior. "They are too close," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "We can't outrun them in your condition. We need another way." Silara hated the reminder of her weakness, but she knew he was right. The healing Menites were helping, but she wasn't at full strength yet. Outside, the warriors spoke in their guttural language. Ethan didn't understand the words, but their intent was clear. They were searching, and they were close. Ethan scanned the room and spotted a hatch leading below the ship's deck. It was half buried under debris, but it looked like it led to a lower storage compartment. "Down there," he whispered. Silara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of hiding. As a warrior princess, she was used to fighting, not running. But this wasn't just about her pride. If they fought now, they would lose. Finally, she gave a reluctant nod. Together, they pushed aside the debris and pried open the hatch. A rusty creak echoed through the wreckage, making Ethan wince. "Move now," he whispered. Silara climbed down first, landing lightly on the metal floor below. Ethan followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them just as a beam of blue light swept through the room above. They held their breath. Above them, the warriors entered the ship. Their heavy boots thudded against the floor, and Ethan could hear the faint hum of energy weapons being drawn. Silara's eyes met his in the darkness. "If they find us, we fight," she mouthed. Ethan gave a small nod. His rifle was ready, but fighting now would be suicide. The warriors moved around, searching, knocking over debris. Ethan could see their shadows through the gaps in the hatch. One of them stepped dangerously close. Ethan slowly reached for his pulse grenade. If they were discovered, he would at least take out a few of them before they went down. But then, a sudden metallic clatter echoed from the far side of the wreckage. The warriors immediately turned toward the sound. One of them barked orders, and within seconds, they were moving away. Ethan realized what had happened. The maintenance drone. The small machine had wandered into another part of the wreckage, creating enough noise to distract the Zereth warriors. Silara exhaled softly. "You are lucky, human." Ethan smirked. "I prefer to call it strategy." They waited in silence as the warriors continued searching. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps began to fade. Finally, the only sound left was the distant hum of the search drones moving further away. Ethan carefully pushed open the hatch and peeked out. The room was empty. "They're gone. For now," he said. Silara climbed out first, moving with renewed energy. "We cannot stay here. They will return." Ethan agreed. He studied the wreckage again, searching for another escape route. Then he noticed a faint green light flashing from a console near the far wall. He walked over and wiped away the dust. The screen flickered to life, displaying old navigation data. "This ship still has power," Ethan muttered. Silara frowned. "How does that help us?" "It cannot fly." Ethan grinned. "It may not fly, but it might have something useful." He tapped on the controls, scrolling through the system logs. Then he found what he was looking for, an emergency escape pod. "There's a pod still intact," he said. "It's buried under debris, but if we clear it, we might be able to launch." Silara's eyes lit up with understanding. "Then what are we waiting for?" They moved quickly, pulling aside broken panels and shifting debris. Ethan worked fast, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Silara, despite her weakened state, helped as much as she could. Finally, after what felt like forever, they uncovered the pod. Ethan pressed a button, and the small craft hummed to life. The hatch slid open, revealing just enough space for two people. Scylla smirked. For once, luck is on our side. Ethan chuckled. I still call it strategy. But just as they prepared to enter, a loud explosion shook the wreckage. Ethan turned sharply. Through the cracks in the metal, he could see bright blue lights approaching fast. The Xerath warriors had found them. They're coming, Scylla said, her voice tense. Ethan jumped into the pod and pulled her inside with him. He slammed the hatch shut and activated the controls. The engines roared to life. The ground beneath them trembled as the pod prepared to launch. Then, a heavy impact struck the side of the pod, shaking it violently. They're trying to stop the launch, Scylla shouted. Ethan gritted his teeth. Not today. With one final press of the button, the escape pod launched, rocketing through the debris and into the sky. Below them, the Xerath warriors fired wildly, but it was too late. They were free. For now, the escape pod shot through the sky, breaking through the planet's thick atmosphere. Inside, Ethan gripped the controls tightly as the small craft rattled under the intense pressure. Scylla sat beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the monitors. We are not safe yet, she said, her voice calm but serious. Ethan glanced at the display. A red warning flashed on the screen. Multiple energy signatures were approaching fast. They're following us, he muttered. Behind them, 3 Xerath patrol ships had launched from the surface, their weapons charging. Ethan's fingers flew across the controls, trying to increase the pod's speed, but it wasn't designed for combat. This thing isn't built for dogfights, he said. If they catch us, we're done. Scylla frowned, looking at the navigation system. There is an asteroid field nearby. If we reach it, we can lose them. Ethan glanced at the coordinates. It was a risky move, but they had no better options. Hold on tight. He jerked the controls sharply, sending the pod into a steep dive. The small craft shook violently as they accelerated toward the asteroid field. The Xerath ships opened fire. Bright blue plasma bolts streaked past them, narrowly missing the pod. One shot grazed the hull, causing the entire cabin to shake. The warning lights blared red as the damage report flashed on the screen. Shields are failing, Scylla warned. Ethan gritted his teeth. Just a little further. The asteroid field came into view, a massive cluster of spinning rocks, some as small as pebbles, others the size of cities. The Xerath ships hesitated for a moment, but then they followed. Ethan guided the pod into the chaos, weaving between massive floating boulders. The sharp turns sent G-forces pressing against his body, but he didn't slow down. Behind them, one of the Xerath ships wasn't as lucky. A large asteroid slammed into it, crushing its hull instantly. The explosion sent debris flying in all directions. 1 down, 2 to go, Ethan said. The remaining ships pursued relentlessly, dodging asteroids and continuing their assault. Another shot clipped the side of the pod, causing sparks to fly inside the cabin. Scylla winced but kept her focus. We cannot keep this up. Ethan's mind raced. They needed an escape plan. Fast. Then he spotted something on the scanner. There. He pointed at a massive asteroid with a hollowed-out cave inside. If we time it right, we can hide in there. Scylla nodded. I hope you know what you are doing, human. Ethan smirked. So do I. He pulled back on the controls, guiding the pod into a sharp roll. The Xerath ships fired wildly, but their shots missed as Ethan dived straight toward the asteroid. The cave entrance was small, barely big enough for the pod. If his calculations were off by even a fraction, they would crash. Hold your breath, he muttered. The pod narrowly squeezed through the entrance, scraping against the rock walls. Behind them, one of the Xerath ships tried to follow, but it was too big. The ship collided with the entrance, exploding on impact. Inside the cave, the pod slowed to a stop. Scylla exhaled. That was reckless. Ethan grinned, but it worked. The last remaining Zareth ship hovered outside the cave, scanning for them. But the asteroid's dense minerals blocked their signal. "They cannot see us," Silera said. "For now, we are safe." Ethan leaned back in his seat, letting out a relieved sigh, but he knew this wasn't over yet. The Zareth wouldn't stop hunting them, and soon they would have to find a way off this rock before it was too late. Inside the asteroid's hollow cave, Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, catching his breath. The emergency lights flickered as smoke drifted from the damaged control panel. Silera inspected the screens, her sharp eyes scanning the readings. "We cannot stay here long," she said. "The Zareth will call for reinforcements." Ethan ran a hand through his messy hair. "Yeah, I know. But our ship's half broken, and if we try to leave now, they'll blast us out of the sky." Silera clenched her jaw. "We need a plan." Ethan checked the scanner. Outside the asteroid, one remaining Zareth ship hovered, waiting. The other two had been destroyed, but the Zareth weren't the type to give up easily. Then he noticed something. "There's a mining outpost on the other side of this asteroid," he said. He pointed at the display. "It's abandoned, but if we can reach it, we might find a ship to escape." Silera studied the map. "It is risky. If we leave the cave, the Zareth might see us." "We don't have a choice," Ethan said. "If we stay here, they'll find us anyway." Silera nodded. "Then let's move." Crossing the asteroid, Ethan and Silera suited up and stepped out of the pod. The asteroid's surface was rough and jagged, filled with deep craters and massive boulders. The weak gravity made every step feel light, but one wrong move could send them floating into space. They moved quickly, using the shadows for cover. Above them, the Zareth patrol ship drifted slowly, scanning for any movement. Ethan's heart pounded. One mistake, and they were dead. After what felt like an eternity, they'd reached the abandoned mining outpost, a collection of old metal structures built into the rock. The doors had been rusted shut, but Silera stepped forward and forced them open with her strength. Inside, the facility was dark and covered in dust. Flickering emergency lights barely illuminated the hallways. Old equipment lay scattered, and the air smelled of rust and stale oxygen. "Looks like no one's been here for years," Ethan whispered. "Let's find a ship," Silera said. They moved deeper inside, searching through the storage rooms. Most of the vehicles were useless, too damaged or out of fuel. But then, they found it. A small transport ship sat in one of the hangars, covered in dust but still intact. Ethan quickly climbed into the cockpit and checked the systems. "It still works," he said with a grin. "We just need to power it up." Silera inspected the fuel reserves. "There is just enough to escape." Ethan started the ignition sequence. The ship hummed to life, its engines roaring softly. Then an alarm blared. The outpost's old sensors had activated, and outside, the Zareth ship turned sharply toward them. "They found us," Silera shouted. "Hold on." Ethan grabbed the controls and launched the ship forward. The hangar doors opened, and they blasted into space. A race against time. The Zareth ship immediately gave chase. It fired plasma bolts, barely missing them. Silera gripped her seat. "We cannot outrun them." Ethan's mind raced. Then he saw something in the distance, a debris field from an old battle. "I have an idea," he said. He steered the ship toward the wreckage. Huge chunks of metal floated in space, broken ships drifting in the void. The Zareth followed, firing wildly. One of their shots clipped the side of Ethan's ship, causing sparks to fly. "We won't survive another hit," Silera warned. Ethan took a deep breath. He needed perfect timing. He suddenly cut the engines, making the ship drift silently between the wreckage. The Zareth, expecting him to keep moving, rushed forward at full speed. And that was their mistake. One of the floating wrecks, a massive broken cruiser, was right in their path. The Zareth ship slammed into the wreckage at full speed, exploding in a fiery burst. Scifi stared in shock. That actually worked. Ethan grinned. Told you I had a plan. The battle was over, but he knew this wasn't the end. The Zareth would not forget this. And soon, they would send more. We need to leave this system, now, Scifi said. Ethan nodded. Let's get out of here. As they flew into the vast unknown, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. Ethan gripped the controls as their small transport ship shot through space. The damaged engines sputtered, but they held together. The Zareth patrol ship was gone, destroyed in the wreckage, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before more of them came looking. Scifi sat beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the navigation screen. We need to find a safe place to land and repair the ship. Ethan checked the star map. There's a neutral trading station nearby. We can hide there for a while. Scifi hesitated. Neutral stations are filled with bounty hunters, mercenaries, and spies. If the Zareth put a price on our heads, someone there might betray us. Ethan sighed. Do we have another option? Scifi thought for a moment, then shook her head. No. Let's go. Ethan set the coordinates, and their ship jumped into hyperspace. Arrival at the station. The trading station floated above a gas giant, surrounded by hundreds of ships. It was an old structure, covered in layers of metal, neon lights blinking across its surface. Inside, it was a chaotic marketplace, with aliens of all kinds moving between vendors, exchanging goods and whispering deals in dark corners. As Ethan and Scifi stepped off their ship, they pulled their hoods up. Blending in was their best chance at survival. We should split up, Scifi said. I will find information. You get supplies and repair parts. Ethan didn't like the idea of separating, but he knew she was right. All right. Stay out of trouble. Scifi gave him a small smirk. I should be telling you that. They went their separate ways. A dangerous discovery. Scifi moved through the crowded corridors, listening to conversations. She needed to know if the Zareth were hunting them. Then she heard something that made her stop. The Zareth are searching for someone. A hooded alien whispered to a trader, a human and a princess. Scifi's heart skipped a beat. They knew. She turned to leave, but suddenly, a hand grabbed her wrist. Princess Scifi, a deep voice said. She spun around and saw a tall, armored figure, a bounty hunter. His reptilian face twisted into a grin. The Zareth will pay a fortune for you, he growled. Scifi didn't hesitate. She struck his wrist, breaking his grip, then spun and delivered a powerful kick to his chest. The bounty hunter crashed into a table, sending food and drinks flying. The crowd gasped. Get her, the bounty hunter roared. More mercenaries rushed toward her. Scifi ran. Ethan's fight. Meanwhile, Ethan was at a supply vendor, negotiating for ship parts when he heard the commotion. Then he saw Scifi running toward him, chased by armed mercenaries. Really? You were supposed to stay out of trouble, he groaned. Run first, complain later, Scifi shouted. The mercenaries fired stun bolts, missing by inches. Ethan grabbed a crate and threw it at them, knocking one down. They dashed through the station, weaving through the crowd. The mercenaries kept coming. Ethan spotted an old cargo elevator and yanked Scifi inside. The doors slammed shut just as the bounty hunters reached them. The elevator rumbled downward. Scifi panted. We have to leave. Now. Ethan nodded. Agreed. But why were they chasing you? Scifi hesitated. Then she spoke the words Ethan never expected. They know who I am. They know I'm the king's daughter. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, you're saying? Scifi nodded. The bounty isn't just on me. It's on you too. The Zareth want us both dead. Ethan exhaled sharply. Well, that complicates things. The elevator reached the lower level, and the doors slid open. More bounty hunters were waiting, Ethan cursed. This day just keeps getting worse. The cargo elevator doors slid open, revealing a group of bounty hunters waiting with weapons drawn. Their leader, a tall reptilian warrior, grinned. "End of the line, princess," he growled. "Hand yourselves over, and maybe I won't turn you in as corpses." Ethan and Silara glanced at each other. They had nowhere to run, but surrendering was not an option. Ethan took a deep breath. "Got a plan." Silara smirked. "Always." Before the bounty hunters could react, she grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him back into the elevator. She slammed her fist against the control panel. The doors shut just in time to block a barrage of laser fire. The elevator shuddered, descending even deeper into the station. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked. Silara checked the screen. "To the maintenance tunnels. We can escape from there." The elevator slowed. As soon as the doors opened, they rushed into the dimly lit tunnels. The air smelled of oil and rust, and steam hissed from broken pipes. A desperate escape. Ethan and Silara ran through the maze of metal corridors. Behind them, alarms blared. The bounty hunters were coming. "We need to reach the docking bay," Ethan said. "If we get to the ship, we can leave before they catch us." Silara nodded. "Follow me. I know a shortcut." She led him through a narrow maintenance shaft, crawling between pipes and cables. The metal walls were hot to the touch, but they kept moving. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the station speakers. "Attention, all personnel. A high-value bounty has been issued for the human and the princess. Capture them immediately." Ethan clenched his fists. "Great. Now the whole station is after us." Silara's expression darkened. "We have to hurry." They pushed forward, reaching a ventilation grate above the docking bay. Below them, their ship sat untouched, but several bounty hunters guarded the entrance. "We'll never make it," Ethan whispered. Silara smirked. "We just need a distraction." She pulled out a small device from her belt, a remote detonator. Ethan's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" Silara winked. "Always be prepared." She pressed the button. The battle for freedom. A huge explosion rocked the station. Fire erupted from a distant corridor, and alarms blared even louder. The bounty hunters turned in panic. "What was that?" One shouted. "Forget it. Stay at your posts." Another barked. But the chaos had already begun. Other traders and mercenaries rushed to secure their own ships, fearing the explosion was an attack on the station. Silara nudged Ethan. "Now's our chance." They dropped from the vent and sprinted toward their ship. A bounty hunter spotted them. "There they are. Stop them." Gunfire erupted. Ethan and Silara dodged behind crates, returning fire. Ethan took down 2 bounty hunters, while Silara knocked out another with a well-placed kick. "Go. I'll cover you," Ethan shouted. Silara ran to the ship, hitting the controls. The boarding ramp lowered, and she jumped inside. Ethan fired one last shot, then sprinted up the ramp just as Silara closed the hatch. "We're in," she yelled. Ethan rushed to the pilot's seat. "Hold on." The engines roared to life, and the ship blasted out of the station. The final decision. As they soared through space, Ethan exhaled. That was too close. Silara sighed. "They won't stop hunting us." Ethan looked at her. "So what now? Where do we go?" Silara hesitated. Then she said something that changed everything. "I have to return home." Ethan frowned. "Home? You mean to your father, the same king who wanted you dead?" Silara nodded. "If I don't go back, the Zureth will use my disappearance as an excuse to start a war. My father might not like me, but he won't allow that." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "So you want me to drop you off in the middle of a hostile palace? That's the plan." Silara smiled. "No, you're coming with me." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me." She held up a small golden insignia, a royal seal. "As my rescuer, You have the right to an audience with the king. He owes you a reward. And that might be the only thing that keeps us both alive." Ethan laughed. "Great. Meeting an alien king who probably hates me. What could go wrong?" Laura smirked. "Everything. But that's what makes it fun." As their ship sped toward the royal homeworld, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The adventure wasn't over yet.